Bill Nye gave us some interesting perspective in comparison to the movie. You guys can come out now. I'm going to start out by, yeah, have a seat. I'm going to start by introducing Andy Revkin of the New York Times. He's been writing about environmental issues for 30 years. He's a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism. He's the author of 3 books, numerous awards, too many to go into. I will mention the Guggenheim Fellowship for National Sciences, and he currently teaches at Pace University. Yeah, let's hear it for Andy.
So I'm going to briefly introduce.
What's doing that? Is it me?
You're radioactive or something. Let me make sure. Make sure your phones are all up. But that wasn't phone interference.
I put mine on stun.
On stun? I love it.
No, airplane.
Yeah, it keeps, when you sit down, it goes on. You stand
That's
up,
weird.
it goes on.
You are like, are you the robotic Bill Nye, or are you the?
I know the word.
Animatronic.
I know the word archaic. Anybody?
Move your chair forward just a little.
Yeah, we'll try that. Anybody know the archaic reference? Anyone?
Arcade?
Archaic. So if you ever see, or should you ever read, sorry, read the Stepford Wives, the robot wife doesn't know the word archaic. And ladies, it was not that long ago, but the pill was capitalized in that book. It was revolutionary technology. And so if you ever read the book, it's scary. It's a science fiction book. It's cool.
There you go.
It's apocalyptic view of the future. You know, we love that. That's what this is all about.
So I got to briefly introduce the other guys here. Robert Stone, the director of the film. I remember he lives up somewhere near Poughkeepsie or New Paltz or somewhere in there. He drove down the Hudson Valley a few years ago and came by where I live, halfway between here and there, and he was kind of like asking questions about nuclear power, and I really didn't know whether he was like an anti-nuke guy, a pro-nuke guy. Maybe you didn't know yourself at that time.
I didn't know.
He didn't know himself at that time. He had done a film about Earth Day, the history of Earth Day, and you know, and so it was interesting to watch this project evolve. And Gernot Wagner, at the end, is a senior economist at the Environmental Defense Fund, who has a book out called Climate Shock with Marty Weitzman, an economist who, is he at MIT or Harvard?
Harvard.
Had he gone back and forth?
He switched once, I believe, but yes, from MIT to
whatever.
Harvard.
There seem to be a lot of people who do that. Anyway, and that book is about the uncertainty in the climate question, and there's a lot of it, despite the things we know, is the reason to act, not the things we don't know, which kind of relates to how you were framing the risks of nuclear power. It's the low probability Homer Simpson, oops, coffee in the... And that's what makes these problems very challenging. In a way, we're more comfortable with energy choices that have this kind of low grade, or like with coal, there's a toll, there's a death toll of many thousands, but you just don't see it. It's not a calamity.
So here's the thing I'd like to ask you guys. Is the reason, and it's quite reasonable, is the reason to embrace nuclear power is because there is a crisis with the climate, and that's the reason?
Sure. If it wasn't for climate, if it wasn't for the impact of CO2 emissions as a greenhouse gas that's heating up the planet and is causing ocean acidification and potentially, you know, a catastrophe in the not too distant future. We have no idea when that might arrive, but if you believe what the climate scientists are telling us, and I do, we are on a very bad trajectory right now that has to be reversed by the complete elimination of fossil fuels within the lifetime of most of the people in this audience. So, because otherwise we could just burn gas, you know? Gas is not really a pollutant in terms of like coal. Yeah, natural gas. It doesn't produce, you know, mercury, which is has a half-life of forever, which is in every fish in the ocean. It comes from burning coal. It doesn't cause 3 million deaths per year from air pollution. It's a clean burning thing, but it produces CO2. It produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So yeah, that is the reason. And if we could do it some other way, I mean, I never came to this as a somebody like who likes nuclear, who looks at nuclear and like, oh, that's the perfect technology, we've got to do that. It's just right now, at this point in human development, given what we're confronted with, which is a series of problems that are all interrelated, where we're between now and 2050, the population is going to, we're going to have about 3 billion people to the planet, go about 10 billion people. What I grew up, and you grew up, you know, we're about the same age, growing up thinking, talking about the third world. This is now the developing world. Billions of people are lifting themselves out of poverty. They want to live modern lives like us, and they're going to live modern lives like us, one way or the other, because there's plentiful fossil fuels, which is another thing we didn't consider.
We'll never run out of fossil fuels.
We're not running out of fossil fuels.
That's the bad news.
So those are two things. You got people, everybody wants more energy. There's more and more of us, and we're not running out of fossil fuels. So what do? We need another source of energy, and there are only a few options available to us, nuclear being one of them. And I think it's incumbent upon us, given the situation, to try to throw everything at this and not say, well, we'll do a lot of this and a lot of that, but that one thing I don't want to do, because what happens if 20 years from now, you know, we needed that one thing and we didn't develop it.
So Gernot, I want to ask you as an economist, you know, I think this always develops in many cases to the radiological risk arguments, but the ones that I've seen that are the toughest arguments for nuclear, any kind of expansion of nuclear at a scale that would be relevant to the climate problem, runs up against financial issues way quicker than it does these questions of safety and all that. Even,
yep.
I mean, the timeline just for getting some of these new reactors online puts it in toward the middle of the century already. So when you look at this as an economist, nuclear, and then you have abundant shale, you know, gas, abundant gas for years to come. I keep seeing studies of how it's not only weakening the case for nuclear, it's weakening the case for R&D on the next generation of energy. It's weakening the case for renewables. So what do you see as a way forward, and how does that economic challenge play against some of the ideas in the movie?
I mean, in some sense, right, Robert, you nailed it with the sort of all of the above, right? So it's, yes, we are running out of atmosphere long before we're running out of fossils, right? Point one. And I hate to correct you on anything, frankly, but right, so it's not about embracing nukes. It's about, like, I'm embracing my wife and my kids, right? I don't like nukes, right? I love my wife, my kids, but it's about hating climate change, right?
Oh, okay, so that's my
let's
question.
price, and this is the economist speaking, right? Let's
but that's
price
my question.
CO2.
Because coal kills people, because coal is horrible,
yep.
let's say, and some of you may be from Kentucky, you love coal, okay. Seriously. No, people who work in the industry, they think it's great. Because that sucks, does that mean we have to do nuclear power?
So, okay, so coal sucks, right? Now, so this is the economist speaking, right? Every ton of coal has more in external damages than it adds value to GDP, right? So think about that for a moment. So every ton of coal, every barrel of oil, by the way, too, right? More in external damages that all of us pay than it adds value to GDP, right? So,
well, right for
right,
you, but not right for Mitch McConnell, for example. You know who I'm talking about?
Well, he looks at the same GDP as we do, right? So the actual economic value, right, is in fact less. The value add is less than the damages. So, right, so let's pay for the freaking damages, right? And basically,
well, we kind of do, right?
Which we know how to do, right? No one is going to win a Nobel Prize in economics for that one. The guy who came up with it died a decade before the first prize was given out, right? So it's been around for a century, right? Price the damage, right? Price CO2, right? Now, of course, now you can sort of accuse sort of economists as
so does that mean we need nuclear?
Well,
you will get, right?
But that, to me, is the premise of the movie. That because it sucks so much.
Yes, from everything that I understand from energy experts who study this, there is no credible path to weaning us from fossil fuels between now and 2050, which is when we need to do this, without nuclear power. If you run the numbers with all the other energy sources, you can't do it. So it's not about, so that's the first step, and that was my first step in the evolution, is like, we need this. Well, once you get your head around the idea that we need this, well, how do we make it better? What are the technologies out there that can make nuclear a better source, a safer source, a more reliable source, and one that we're all more comfortable with than we have today? And lo and behold, there are a huge number of different types of plants that operate in a very, very different way that are being developed that we can bring online probably in about 10 or 15 years if we really start developing these things. They've been around for a long time. And so that's exciting. The idea of a nuclear plant that consumes the waste that we built up over the last 40 years, that's exciting. The idea of a plant that doesn't have Homer Simpson because the physics of it, the very physics of the design of the plant prevents it from melting down because, for instance, it's a molten salt reactor. The fuel actually is in liquid form. It's already melted.
Kind of like self-driving cars.
That's exciting.
No, self-driving cars are really
I'm scared of self-driving.
No, I know, I am too.
well, you're not scared of landing in planes with autopilots.
Right.
But
But I'm more scared of climate change. You talked about risk. Like that's all, to me, that's a certainty. Like with the trajectory we're on, we're burning more and more fossil fuels. Coal is the fastest growing source of energy in the world. It's the fastest growing still, and it's the most widely used. So everything is trending in the wrong way. So I think we have to put everything into this, all of our technological know-how, renewables, wind, solar, hydro. We're going to have to do a lot of things we don't want to do. We're going to have to put wind turbines in places we don't want them. We're going to have to build dams in places we don't want them, and we're going to have more nuclear plants. So anybody who's flown over New York City at night in the winter and looked down and how is this city, well, the amount of energy this one city, and there's millions of cities around the world, is consuming is just mind-boggling.
So, Bill, I wanted to ask you, do you have your own energy scenario, given the concerns you have about nuclear, to get us decarbonized in this century, let alone 2050?
Yeah, so my parents were both veterans of World War II. They're both buried at Arlington, or their ashes are at Arlington Cemetery. It's very cool, but they are considered part of the greatest generation. I want you guys to be the next great generation. So there's 3 things I want you to do. The first 2 are really easy. Find a way to desalinate seawater with far lower energy than anybody's thought of yet in hundreds of centuries of chemical engineering. Then invent a better battery or a better family of batteries. If we could store electricity economically, it would, dare I say it, change the world. If the thing that people imagine now is under buildings like this would be enormous batteries that would be, let's say, by tradition would be the size of a container truck, an 18-wheeler, the container on an 18-wheeler truck, and you'd have them under these buildings, and they'd be dangerously hot. But they'd be under the building, and we would manage it.
What if they were made of toxic materials?
Well, I'm sure they will be. I mean,
well,
to start
there you got another problem.
And by the way, and I'm right there with my watch. You don't wind it; it's solar powered, and this solar panel is about 10% efficient, and it's got, I'm sure, some exotic germaniums or some fabulous thing in it. But what if you invented a solar panel that was as efficient as spacecraft? They're about 30% efficient. What if it were 80% efficient? What if it were carbon-based? You would get rich, like Bill Gates rich, like head of IKEA guy rich. Okay, so those are 2 technical things. That would be great. The other thing that we're going to need, in my opinion, since you asked, lucky you, is we're going to need a top-down top-down system to discourage carbon dioxide production and encourage innovation. And we are not allowed, no one may utter the word TAX. No, I did not hear that. We would have a fee, a carbon fee, totally different from a TAX, nothing like that.
Wait, not a 4-letter word, fee?
Well, you can spell it with 2 X's, I guess. If you had fees, make it plural, yeah. But then taxes becomes 5 letters. Ah, damn it. So, how many is in that? That's got 5. That's got 6. Damn it, it's got 6. So what we'd want to do, this would do a couple things. You would have a fee on carbon dioxide production. And this would be apply to everybody. If you're a rich guy and you've got 7 houses or you've got 4 cars, you make more carbon dioxide, so you would pay more fees. If you're a middle-class person, you pay less fee. Poor people, hardly at all. So that would discourage carbon dioxide production. Then you could use it to redistribute wealth. Or crazier still, invest in new technologies. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Yeah. Government investment? The man? Don't tell me what to do. And then the third thing is you would encourage innovation. All the entrepreneurs that are running around, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a startup, I'm a CEO, those people would be working on new batteries, new solar panels, new wind turbines. And the other thing is new power lines. If we could get nanotube power lines, man. I met Rick Smalley, who discovered nanotubes, buckyballs, I mean. He said it's like the electron has a dream and goes to the other end of the tube with no electrical resistance. And when I interviewed him, he was pushing, man. He really wanted to get us out. And he said the key to the future is not to do less, but to do more with less. And the guy died of cancer a month later. It was really got to me. But the model for this exists, everybody. We go to that bastion of liberal progressive thought, the bluest blue state of Alaska. Wait, that's not right. That's the most libertarian, everybody should carry 2 guns just all the time state there is. But they have a system in Alaska, this libertarian state, to redistribute wealth, the Alaska Permanent Fund. And so every year, you have to live there.
But that's because they've got all the fossil fuels, though. I mean, come on, that's not going to work.
But here's the thing.
We want to stop digging fossil fuels.
No, but here's the thing. Even the libertarians thought it was a good idea. Thought it was
everybody wants money.
Gernot,
well, you don't have to go to Alaska, right? So we have, what, 1/3 of all GDP in the world is produced in places where there is, in fact, a price on CO2, right? Again, don't mention the word TAX, but there is a price on
Where is this?
Carbon. Well, starting California.
Yeah,
right?
California.
There is a cap on CO2, cap and trade system. The price is basically about $12-13 right now per ton of CO2. Right? It's not where sort of us economists would want it to be quite yet. It's the perfect system.
What would you want to be, like 40?
That would be the social cost of carbon, right? That we sort of are currently calculating. But then again, right, globally we're at -15, right? $500 billion worth of fossil fuel subsidies. We are pointing the other way, right? We're not even getting the sign right. So you have places like California, right, who are, or you go to Sweden, right? So not quite the most libertarian 2-gun carrying states out there, but they have a price on CO2 of $150 a ton, right? Now, you ask the average Swede at night sort of how their day went, and they'll talk about their wives and girlfriends and husbands and boyfriends. They don't talk about the price on CO2, right? Life goes on. It just happens to be much more decarbonized. Home heating sector is basically 0 carbon, right? Helps to have a lot of wood.
They got a lot of nuclear and a lot of hydro.
And yes, but that's the point, right? No CO2 in the system because the one thing we have in economics, right? Law of demand, right? Price goes up, demand goes down. Works every single time.
I got to fit in some audience questions. The Twitter flow is pretty good. There are several questions about the leapfrog nuclear question, fusion, of course, which I wrote a piece a couple of years ago about. That people were starting to say it really is now just 20 years away.
I thought it was 40.
Well, you know, you can pick your number. Is there some prospect of fusion being a meaningful player here?
I've seen it. I went to a fusion plant, a top secret one in Pasadena. It's in the middle of a suburb. They don't know it's there. But yeah, it's a big thing. Bill Gates has invested.
I hope there's no Homer Simpson nearby.
No, it's for real. I believe that, and I know a lot of people who are working on this stuff, I believe that within this century, we will have fusion. I think and probably, you know, within the lifetime of people in this room, we will have fusion. So what we're really talking about in all of this, and in the climate and the population growing and doubling, tripling energy demand, this bubble, we've got to get through this century. And this is what so that we can make decisions about the future, our future generations can make decisions about what kind of world they want to live in. We've got to pass on a habitable planet to our children and our grandchildren. And it's not like we're going to build thousands of nuclear plants all over the world, and this is what's going to power the world forever. We just have to get through the next sort of 50 years, I think, and we will have, the way technology is advancing, we will have a source of energy that will power this entire planet affordably and cleanly. I think that is in the offing. We're not there yet. And we can desalinate all the water we want, and we can lift everybody out of poverty, and this will happen. But we've got to make some decisions now. We can't just say, well, what if we had a battery? What if we had these super power lines? What if we had a political process that could get things done? And have that get us off the hook. Because these things are not happening. What is happening is we're burning more fossil fuels, because we're not doing the things that are necessary. And one of the things that I think is necessary, it may be unpleasant for some people, but we do have to build more nuclear plants using the technology that we have readily available. It's not forever.
So hold on. So when you say technology available, are you talking about this new class 4?
I think I would just like to see a lot of R&D in that. A lot of them are ready to go. I know people who are running these companies. I mean, they are ready to go. They want to build prototypes. But there's new nuclear plants that are orders of magnitude more advanced than the 70s era things that we're stuck with, that are great and can power cities. There's one going up in Georgia right now. I went and visited. I mean, it's godly, ridiculously expensive, but it's going to give carbon-free electricity to Atlanta for 100 years when it's done, and it will,
What's it called?
The Vocal plant.
Vocal, V-O-K-L?
That's the name of it's an AP1000.
I have a question a little bit for Bill about the generational call you made there. Some of the most interesting people in the nuclear energy field right now are in their 20s. Leslie Dewan, who runs Transatomic, this company in Boston, she and her young partner, both MIT PhDs. You kind of seem to be saying they're not on your list.
No, I'm all for it, but
you didn't include nuclear in your call. Batteries.
Oh
storage.
no! I just think that here's our problem, everybody. If you go to Boston and say we're going to build a nuclear plant in Cambridge, nobody's going to want it.
But they're not. I mean, they're not.
But they don't want
build it
anything,
there.
though.
They're
The people on Cape Cod, they don't want the wind farm. They shut down the wind farm.
Here's what I'm saying.
They said, I don't want it. But
It's
we all want to
as
turn the
big a
lights.
problem. So you guys, this is a true story as opposed to something else. I was approached years ago by a company that wanted to have dirigible tourism. They wanted to build big airships and fly across the Atlantic and around actually the Middle East, and they wanted to have tourism. And this guy had it all figured out, and he was in the restaurant business or the hotel business or what we call hospitality industry. Had it all worked out, and here's the key, is the lifting gas, as it's called, is going to be hydrogen. It's great. It weighs as quarter as much as helium. It's going to be fabulous. Right. Dude, nobody's going to get on your freaking airship. All right? It's just, nobody's, because they've seen the cover of Led Zeppelin 1. I don't know if you've heard of it. The guy may be right. Yeah. He may be right. But nobody's going to get on there. And so we're going to have to build a number 4, whatever it's called, 4th generation nuclear power plant and prove it. You know what I mean? Somebody's going to have to prove it. And if you're asking me, I would build it in Idaho. But I mean, no, you guys are the hottest girl.
People always say, let's build all these solar plants out in the desert. And why not build a bunch of nuclear plants out in the desert and use less desert and get more? Maybe you're going to put it in a remote area.
No, you have to put it where Idaho's the only place where you can get plutonium-238 for your spacecraft. Okay, it's the only place, in Russia. And so they have a long history of handling, there's a lot of infrastructure for handling that stuff. And I would love that. Let's invest in that and see if it really works.
Although it's going to be built in China, actually.
Yeah, okay.
And it's going to be built no matter what anyone on this panel
says.
Yeah,
good, okay.
Which gets at the competitiveness issue. David Sandel is in the room, I think he could probably talk about this. There are these fundamental realities. Most of the energy needs on the planet are not here. They're in China and India and countries that... India, this is a mantra of mine. Just this year, the Carbon Tracker folks came out with their new per capita carbon dioxide per year numbers. India is all the way up to 1.9 tons per person per year. We're 17, which is down from 20. We've done a pretty big lift coming down to 17 from 20. Europe is approaching 6. China is up to 6. And all the growth, IEA, EIA, you look at any of their assessments, something like 90% of the growth in emissions is coming in those countries, not here. And they have these energy needs that are just magnificently large.
Man, you go to watch the weather report in China, in Chinese.
Which is why nuclear is something they're really pushing.
There are 15 cities of 15 million people that you have never heard of. I mean, they're just, it's just amazing how many people. And then I was in India, and there's guys pulling their goods to market on truck beds with camels. It's not uncommon in rural areas. And
600 million people 400 million people in India didn't know that there was a blackout when they had the world's biggest blackout because they're not on the grid.
Yeah, 20% of the world's people live without electricity. So, by the way, everybody's worried about the singularity when the computer is as smart as a human. As long as it's plugged in, I guess, Seriously, I just don't know that everybody's got a handle.
Have you given
on it.
that talk at the Singularity University?
I mean, those guys Harry Floor. I mean, I'm all for it. But
just unplug it.
Yeah, somebody's got to shovel the coal for the Colossus to take over the world. And, I'm not saying it won't be a significant event. It's just a lot of people won't even know about it. But you don't want, we want to engage as many brains as we can.
Yeah.
We want to have everybody working on these problems. But if I were king of the forest, and I'm not, we would invest in technology, invest in in basic research. It's this classic thing. I work in space exploration, the planetary side. It's this classic thing. Why are you guys going to try that? What are you going to find? We don't know. That's why we're exploring.
Right.
So.
And by the way, on that front, Gersten has, you have something to say, but I have to show you. It's very easy, even from a distance, to see this graph, I think. This is basically Sputnik happened. And there was this yellow burst on this graph of spending in basic science on getting to space. And then that kind of was done. And then there's this big purple graph that glows. And that was the war on cancer. There's this little dribble for energy research that has it looks like an anaconda swallowed a tennis ball. And the tennis ball is the oil crisis in the 70s. And that is our interest in energy. We've been in a bipartisan slumber party on basic science on energy. It's something we just don't care about because you plug it in. And I don't know, you've been doing a lot to spur this idea that we need more basic investment in R&D. Is there anything else we can do? I mean, Obama has his science fairs. What else can?
The science fair is cool.
I know you were just there.
No, just that it even exists.
I want to go. Yeah.
No, just that it exists. And you guys, there people who work in education, this whole thing, is there anybody here who hasn't heard the acronym STEM? STEM. Okay.
Right.
Okay. That's good, investing in science, technology, energy, and math. But when you look at the Sputnik and the Apollo era, there was a time where everybody just assumed we would be flying in space. And not that that's good or bad, just the expectations that science was good, that we could use science to solve problems and improve the world. I really want to bring back.
That's actually what I'm making a film about right now.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted you to briefly talk about that. But Gernot, I know you've been sitting on an idea there. So can you quickly elaborate, and then we'll go to the next film?
So all the way back to India and China, right? So meanwhile, right, India has $1 per ton tax on coal, not CO2, coal, which of course adds up to more per ton of CO2, by the way. China has 7 regional cap and trade trials, right? And NDRC, the National Development Reform Commission, is basically writing the next 5-year plan, and rumors, of course, but it will most likely have some sort of national cap on CO2 emissions, right? That's China, right? So last time we in this country tried to pass a comprehensive climate bill, there were 2 countries mentioned on the first page, or actually 3 technically, right? The United States of America on top probably, but in the main text it was China and India. And it wasn't sort of like, look at them, what they're doing, right? It was, unless they do it, we won't.
So,
now, right, we are the ones looking, even on the TAX.
So you guys,
bit, right?
I was born in the U.S., okay? I don't know any better. I'm a patriot. But my claim, and this is a claim, if the U.S. were leading, if the U.S. were out in front on this stuff, there would just be, I don't know how else you describe it, whining. Well, India is flaring natural gas in the northwest sector, and that's just not fair. Well, if the United States were out in front of this, everybody would be on board.
I agree.
And we just have this extraordinary situation where the fossil fuel industry has introduced this idea that scientific uncertainty, plus or minus somebody's percent, is the same as doubt about the whole thing. And they even hired the same guys, Seitz and Singer, the guys who worked for the cigarette industry. And you talk about leaving the world worse than you found it. Man.
So Gernot, that's the heart of your book, this question of that uncertainty. Yep. Could you just distill quickly this question of why that leads you to conclude that that's the reason to act, because it's so often you see just the opposite.
I mean, here's the first problem, right? So every economist worth his or her professional degree, right, has read this one paper from 1923 that defines that uncertainty is worse than a risk, right? Bull, right? I mean, in English, it's not, right? Uncertainty means wait and see. Risk means mitigate. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the climate context, very clearly, right? So in other words, right, climate is a risk management issue. And yes, we know enough to act, and what we don't know only makes it worse, right? Like we can basically cut this thing off at zero, as in adding CO2 isn't going to make it better.
Yes.
But there is a tail. Some might call it a fat tail, some might call it a black swan, or right, Forrest Gump calls it more colorfully, sort of, life happens. We can't cut that thing off, right? That's the problem. That's the risk management problem right there. Okay. And that's the core of the climate problem, right? The less we know about that, the more expensive it actually is.
Just because we have limited time, I want to make sure we get in a couple of questions from Twitter. And there's several different facets of the waste question. I've stood next to the dry cask storage. It's right up here in the Hudson Valley, right 8 miles from my house at Indian Point. It's very impressive. And then you go into the pool and you hear about the overcrowding of the pool. We have all these questions about Yucca Mountain.
The waste is heating up again. They're getting too close together in the pool.
Right. So Robert, can you kind of weigh in on you and then everyone else if they want on what are the options for waste? And I know there's some of the reactor designs that can consume it, but just sort of give your sense of what the waste issue will look like in a few years, 10 years or so.
Well, first of all, I mean, what impressed me, and I think one of the biggest surprises for me was just volumetrically how small the waste is.
The high-level waste.
Compared to the, the high-level waste, which is the stuff we're worried about, compared to the amount of energy we get out of it. And I think that one of the most mind-blowing experiences I had making the film was when I went to France and they showed me, it's in the movie, you might remember, I go into this room where they store all the high-level waste from powering. France is basically entirely powered with nuclear energy. 80% of their electric grid is nuclear power. And they've been doing it for about 30 years. Well, you walk into this room, it's about the size of the lower part of this auditorium, the orchestra here. And they've got these, maybe a little smaller actually, and they've got these tubes sunk into the floor. They're about, I think, they're about a meter wide and 10 meters down, vitrified glass and stainless steel. And this is where the waste is. And I was like, wow, this entire country is like, that's all there is that's left over, the high-level stuff. And I said, well, just to get my head around this, I said, how many of these tubes is what's left over from powering the city of Paris for the last 30 years? And the guy said 4 tubes. Now you compare that to coal, where the waste is simply spewed into the atmosphere on a daily basis. You're worried about a heavy metal toxin like plutonium. Well, heavy metal toxin like mercury, whose half-life is not 24,000 years, but forever, is spewed out every day in the normal course of doing business. So what we're doing now is using the atmosphere as a waste dump for our energy production. And nuclear waste is actually contained and volumetrically very small. And then, the kicker is, that these next generation reactors that we've already demonstrated that we do know how to use, can use this waste, all the waste that was in that proverbial football field in the film. If you recycled that through next generation reactors, you could power everything in the United States at today's level, including the transportation sector, for 1,000 years without ever mining a gram of uranium again, okay? And what you're left with is a waste of around like different estimates, 300 years to 800 years. You know, we store, there's all kinds of chemical wastes. I mean, you know, you're the science guy, you know. We do know how to handle waste. It's not like an impossible thing compared to just running it up the smokestack.
Yeah.
So it's all of these, any energy source, if you look at it in isolation and go, well, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that's bad, okay, let's not do that. But if you look at the whole, you got to step back at the context, as we've been talking about, global planet, global energy, all those different sources, what do we have? Nuclear starts to look better and better compared to everything else. And safety, it's the safest form of energy. Has the least amount of waste.
There's only 432 commercial plants. I mean, if they're...
It's about 14% of the world's electricity.
Yeah, but I mean, if there are 10 times that many, there's going to be an accident. We just have to decide, you know, if we can manage it.
Well, this gets to this perception issues versus reality. Paul Slovic wrote a really important sociological analysis a long time ago called The Feeling of Risk. Spencer Weir wrote this great book called The Rise of Nuclear Fear, which goes from World War II, the bomb, onward, historian of science. And they show powerfully that, you know, even the costs of nuclear are largely a function of how we treat those risks. The fear factor around radiation is so powerful. And when you look back, there were some questions about radiological risk, you know, one of the fundamental questions here, which is in the film. I love that moment when Mark Linus, who's very pro-nuclear, he's there getting to the Fukushima zone, he's like, you know, I'm feeling a little queasy here. You can see his fear factor, which gets at something that's fundamentally important in this whole question, which is we don't make rational decisions. We're all science guys to some extent on this stage. But decisions are not mostly made based on those data. They're based on perception. You know, if we truly priced coal, which, you know, I was on a stage a few years ago with an undersecretary of health talking about, can you like make public health visceral so that people would understand what 10,000 deaths mean? If you did that, you could maybe make a difference. But he said every time I go to a congressional hearing, someone says, well, where's the bodies? Show me the bodies. And so what do you think about that part? I mean, you deal with irrational responses to your arguments all the time.
Well, I don't think anybody here thinks that coal is good, right? But is that the same issue as nuclear is good? Is that the same issue as nuclear is bad? I mean, it's bad, okay? Let's do something else.
But then you get to that something else reality, and that's
this is where if I were king of the forest, we'd do everything all at once. That's been my solution to climate change. Right.
But on climate, on climate, I've been writing about it since before there was a treaty. Way back in 1988, I started writing. The evolution,
June 23rd, 1988.
the evolution of the problem at the global scale has been exactly opposite of heading toward a top-down solution. But actually, and I think maybe Gernot could weigh in on this, people realize that that's actually a good thing, because if the idea you're going to have a binding treaty with targets and timetables that are punitive means that you're going to guarantee no one will actually play the game. This is an economic
free rider, right? So this is the perfect problem, right?
And so now in Lima, the description, they're heading back to what's called soft diplomacy to get 200 countries, to get India to even sign anything. There will be no mandatory cap. It's just not, so we're heading away from the top-down magical solution.
Well, the top-down was going to be with this organization called the Internal Revenue Service. It was going to be in the U.S. only. That was the top-down I'm going for.
Well, meanwhile, of course, right, we have the U.S. and China signing climate deal last November, right? The two biggest polluters, the two biggest economies.
But not binding.
Well, as binding as anything, right? The two most powerful men on the planet basically say we will be doing this.
This is a perfect example of nuclear. Actually, the only way that China has any hope in hell of living up to that commitment is by building a hell of a lot of nuclear plants, which is what it's doing. I mean,
actually,
I don't know
that's
if
not true. That's not true. The 2030 target they can hit, they're almost on target to hit it already.
Well,
that's the whole idea.
They've peaked their coal use, right? So, for example, right? Like, I mean, we're not. I mean, I realize I wrote a book called Climate Shock.
Sorry,
but,
it's getting wonky.
Right? So, CO2 emissions globally from energy did not go up in 2014, right? For the very first time since IEA has been keeping track of these things, without a recession. Right? Now, are we solving the problem? No, of course not. Now we are filling the atmospheric bathtub at a steady rate. Is that good? No, it's still going to be overflowing. We need to get it down. But still, right? It's not like...
It's progress.
But that's an important point that I don't think people understand.
Step one, right?
You should explain that, because it's an important point that I think most people don't understand. You could stop, well, do you understand it? Because we could stop burning fossil fuels today, and the planet would continue to heat up.
Yep.
The inside of the pot roast still gets warm after you turn the oven off. Or pot roast. Do you follow me?
Because of all the fossil fuels we've burned over the last 200 years.
Actually, I mean, the amazing thing on this, right? So you quiz basically 200 MIT graduate students in an actual study, right? About precisely this. They don't get it. Now, admittedly, right, you don't tell them about the bathtub, you tell them about an IPCC report. But that's sort of the point, right? The executive summary of the IPCC report does not lead 200 MIT graduate students, admittedly not Columbia, but still, right, to sort of draw the right conclusion, which is amazing, right? So, you know.
They argued over one word for a day, right?
Yeah. By the way, there's a question I forgot to ask. I did one other event like this, a screening of the film up in the Hudson Valley, and I started by asking the audience, whatever your disposition on nuclear energy was before you came to watch the film,
that's cool.
Did it shift markedly in one way or the other? Just raise your hand if your mindset changed in some way. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, so then I'm going to ask, you know, was it positive? Towards some support for nuclear that might not have been there before? Let's just see. Raise them higher. That's a lot.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And how about negative?
A couple people,
yeah. So to me, one of the things when I wrote about the film when it first came out, I said it's a very powerful jog to our perceptions and predispositions, and a challenge that can help you sort of perhaps want to learn more, and I think that's really an important part of it. There's some questions about, I think it comes down to, if the film had one message for me, it was in a world, we've been in a world of polarization for decades on energy and climate. You're either a denier or a believer. You're either pro-nuke or no nuke. And this film was kind of saying, some nukes.
Yeah.
But as I've said this to Robert before, so how do you build a movement? How do you have signs? Some nukes. What is that?
Appropriate technology.
Well,
or better nukes.
Well, yeah.
It sounds like a John Stewart rally.
Better nukes. It's very hard to be nuanced. It's very hard to find a middle ground. And in the Hudson Valley where I live, we're just surrounded by polarization on fracking, on the Indian Point. My wife and I have different views on whether the existing Indian Point should keep running or be shut down as quickly as possible. So even in our own household, it's not a marital issue. She's an environmental educator. We love each other. So how do we...
Yeah, we do. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know.
Everything's fine. Great.
So do you have your own vision? You've been kind of pushing the film out now for a little while. Do you have a sense that there's a way to articulate in a movement kind of way some nukes?
Well, first of all, I found that young people have a very different perspective on this than people of my generation. I've found wherever I go, people under the age of 40 are very open to this. They grew up, they have a very different attitude towards technology. I think people who grew up during the Cold War grew up thinking, well, the technology was the problem. And that was certainly what we perceived, you know, around the time of the first Earth Day, you know, industrialization, big corporations, modern society, it's all a big problem. We need to sort of simplify and get back and get our energy from natural forces and things like this. And I think young people have a very different, came of age where the existential threat for them was climate change, not, you know, a missile from the Soviet Union. And they grew up with the iPhones and computers, and technology is perceived as something that can solve problems. Yeah, there are problems that go along with it, but generally a more positive view. So I've been very encouraged. And like just the response here from you guys, I mean, I get this wherever I go, and I've been on the road with this for almost 2.5 years now. And I'm incredibly encouraged.
And
but
actually,
I just want to say
talk about your next film.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to touch on.
Final point.
Because wherever I've gone, there's this, and it came up tonight, like why can't we get something done? Like why can't we do all the what ifs? And why can't we, don't we have the political will? And as your chart points out, you know, there was this time, this brief period of time, where we spent a lot of money on technology and R&D.
Space race.
To do the space race. So I'm making a film about the space race, but from a very different perspective than has been done before. It's like really looking at how a very small number of people came up with an idea to do of this bold technological ambitious goal and rallied the nation to it and sustained that through the most turbulent decade for about 10 years. And how did they do that? And they did it by creating a narrative, by creating a story that engaged people and made people feel that they were part of something, that's part of something bigger than themselves. And I think that's what we, and certainly people in the scientific community, I think have lacked in communicating about climate change, communicating about a very dry subject like energy, why this is important and why we need to pay attention to this and to get people involved and make it feel like it's a national mission, a national goal. France did this. In a sense, France's transition to nuclear was left and right coming together to free itself of dependence on foreign oil.
And it was an existential crisis.
It was an existential crisis.
That's one of the challenges.
Let me ask you this. So here
We're almost at the end.
I know. Here's a claim. NASA is the best brand the United States has.
Yeah.
Anywhere you go, people love NASA. Everybody in the U.S. felt part of the landing on the moon, which was a Cold War thing. In France, the engineers that run the nuclear power plants are respected. They are anything but Homer Simpson, right? And that is because, can you compare that? In other words, in the same way NASA rocket scientists were celebrated, are French nuclear engineers celebrated?
Yeah, I think, even LBJ, there's a great quote of his.
He was a president.
He was a president. Lyndon Baines Johnson, a long time ago. But he saw, the reason he supported the space program is he said that this will demonstrate that government can do big things.
So that's a great place to call things to the close. The Twitter stream will continue. I'll try to write something on .earth so we can continue the conversation there. It's been great to have that introductory exploration of the questions by Bill.
Thank you,
Dr. Bill. And Robert, congratulations on a very important film. And Gernot, best of luck with your book, Climate Shock. Thanks for coming.